Hello, peoples. It's good to be back. Good to see all of you. Lawrence actually covered some of what I was going to talk about too, so we should have probably planned a little bit more, but I do have a little bit of a different take on a couple things, although I often find myself agreeing with him most of the time. But what I brought with me today were slides that cover your specific market area. I've grown Lee County and your neighbors up north because I know your business up there too. I'll be covering both Collier and Lee County in my presentation, but I wanted to walk you through what our statistics are seeing that we're compiling at Florida Realtors. We compile MLS-based statistics from all the MLSs in the state and combine them into one data set so we can analyze every market and make comparisons and do analysis and such. We'll warn you that our MLS data does include new construction, and I know that in Lee County there's been probably a lot more new construction listings than there used to be. It used to be a very small percentage, even when we were building a lot, but the builders just seem to think that we're important and maybe they need to borrow us for some things. So that skews the Lee County data a little bit, not so much in the Collier County data. And in fact, some of the data I'm going to show you, I've just combined the two counties when the trend is in the same direction. But I want to start by showing you what the overall statewide trend is. That's what I normally am speaking on. And this shows you, our data set starts in 2008. We didn't pick 2008 because that's a good year to start, although it is, because there's nowhere to go from up in 2008. But that's how long our data series goes back. So clearly we're in the midst of the Great Recession at that time, and we had a somewhat slow recovery. Job growth started to improve in 2012, 2013, and then things started moving along. And of course you see the pandemic era, the last 5 years here, where in 2021 it was a bonanza of housing sales that was short-lived because in 2022, rates went up. Lawrence covered rates to a significant degree. Just looking at 2024, we were down about 2% statewide in terms of sales. This is for single family homes, by the way. I'm doing condos separately today. So about 2%, which was big improvement over the declines we saw in 2022 and 2023, but still going in the wrong direction. And I think those 2 years were the lowest number of sales of single family homes we had since back in 2014. Now, obviously, we're more than halfway through 2025 now, so in order for us to kind of get a sense of where we're at this year, I'm going to divide each of these bars into first half, second half of the year. Orange is first half of the year, and then I'll show you the first half of this year because we have the data for that. And it's about 128,000 single-family home sales statewide, and that's about a 2.3% decline compared to a year ago. Now, let's move on. This is Collier and Lee County data combined from your MLSs. From all the multiple MLSs that serve the area. And you look here and we're down last year about 3%, so a little bit worse than the statewide number, but not really that much not significantly different. And that would be the lowest total since 2017, so not as far back as we went in the state. And this year so far, about down 1%. So like Lawrence was saying, the growth, it's not just Florida, nationwide, the growth in sales stagnated and has been roughly on the decline. So the past 2 or 3 years, and then that makes your market no different than most other places. Now I've got some data by zip code here just to show you that, yeah, you can look at a county-wide or a region-wide number and gives you the impression that maybe every part of that market is moving in the same direction, but that's not always true. Here, if you look at this is by zip code. You look at the size of the bubble. That's roughly how many sales we saw in the first half of this year so far, compared to So look at Cape Coral. You see that the Northwest zip code in Cape Coral had the most sales of single-family homes, but what the more important number to look at is, and the color of the circle, that's what I find important from this chart. So the color is going to tell you year over year how have sales changed in that zip code. If it's blue, then you've got a negative number. That means sales are down compared to a year ago. And if it's orange, then sales are up compared to a year ago. So looking up in Lee County, Cape Coral, obviously sales are down. Move out to Lehigh Acres, sales are up. And in central Fort Myers, downtown, sales down, but you go south of there towards towards the beaches, and you have significant improvement. Bonita Estero area, kind of flat. Then we get down here into Collier County, and you see Central Naples doing better than a year ago in terms of sales, and then further up I-75 and out east, and maybe down towards Marco, a little bit worse than last year. But the center of city of Naples really going strong. I think there's a lot of transactions there compared to a year ago. Now let's move to condos and townhouses. There you see a more significant drop-off since 2021 that has, and this is statewide. So you'll see a lot of articles in national publications, talking about our condo reserve requirements and how that's affected the market. And it seems like every one of those articles is always about South Florida, Miami, the Broward County area. But in the data I'm seeing, condo sales are weak everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're on this side of the state or on the East Coast or up in the Panhandle. We've seen significant deterioration in the number of condo sales versus single family sales. Florida Realtors, my department, we combine condos and townhouses because there are some parts of the state where the MLSs don't really bother to differentiate between those two things. So when we combine all the data, there's no way to split those out. But you know your market pretty well. You know that you probably have a lot more condos than traditional townhouses in your market. So this is pretty reflective of just condos. Now, the sales number statewide for condos was around 94,000 last year, and that is the lowest since 2010. And if you want to look at what we've done so far this year statewide, down another 12% first half of the year, year over year. Now here in Southwest Florida, down 13% last year. Like I said, it's everywhere. It's not just Miami or other select places. And that's the lowest number since 2009. So far this year, down another 10%. So kind of mirroring what we're seeing statewide. It's not just you. It's everywhere. Looking at condos by zip code, you see a lot fewer orange circles on this chart compared to what we saw with single family homes. There, where we have our concentrations of condos down here in Southwest Florida, it's been mostly negative in terms of sales growth. I don't think that really surprises a lot of you. Now, what I do hear going around the state is, if the condo is newer and not subject to so much of these requirements, they're selling just like they always have. If the condo associations have their act together and can provide the accurate documentation that the lenders and the buyers want to see before making this purchase, things go pretty smoothly. It's just that there's a lot of older condos that were taken by surprise and they're having trouble getting their act together. So if I had a way of splitting that data up, I would probably see pretty decent sales for newer condos or condos where at least the condo association has their act together or all along has been planning for contingencies such as needing repairs. So what we see from the data so far is sales down. I like to start by bumming everybody out. I love speaking in this facility, though, by the way. This spoils me. I love having huge screens so you guys can actually see my charts. Some areas of the state I show up and I make the print as big as I can, but they have an old slide projector from 1963 and that somehow runs PowerPoint. And I love this facility. Am I right? The Arthrex Corporation is based here in Naples primarily to handle the replacement of joints after pickleball injuries. Is that? I love railing on pickleball every time I come down here. I played tennis growing up and I feel like it's killing off my favorite sport. So a little jaded, as I'll always be inordinately negative about pickleball. You just have to, I hope you don't take offense. I just would note that you're going to run out of land to develop housing if you keep building pickleball courts. And in addition to that, next hurricane comes along, where will the water go? It can't soak through a pickleball court. It'll all funnel into, it's going to be bad. Lawrence started out with mortgages, and that was, in my opinion, the right thing to start out with, because in my opinion, that's still the thing that's impacting housing in Florida the most in terms of weakening our demand, and it's the main reason why we're seeing fewer sales than we used to. Lawrence was right to mention that you're, at least 50% cash in your market for the most part, but that's another 50% that's still using mortgages. So, an additional explanation to Lawrence's that I would add is that, that means that a significant portion of potential buyers is still knocked out because they can't, pencil in a mortgage at these rates and at current prices. So that's less competition among buyers for the same amount of homes. So still going to cause difficulties in your market. I want to go through, this is Florida data. Well, the top chart is the mortgage rate, national average 30-year fixed mortgage rate. Lawrence was showing you that as well. I'm putting it back to 1993 here. So I want to focus on that, the orange line being the mortgage rate. The green line is our median sale price in Florida for a single family home back to 93. I mean, look back at 93, the median means half the homes sold for more, half of them sold for less. It's the exact middle price of all the homes that sold each month. It's less than $100,000 back in 1993. The typical Florida home cost less than $100,000 back then, and now it's above $400,000. So half the homes sell for $400,000 or less now. And then the blue line is where I just take the interest rate and I take the mortgage rate. Lawrence had a similar chart to this too, where I just calculate the monthly payment on a mortgage at the interest rate and price at the time for the median price home. And like Lawrence said, it nearly has doubled. So not just nationally, but here in Florida. Want to draw your attention on the orange chart to late 2012. That was about 3.35%. That was our all-time low prior to the pandemic. As you can see, the general downward trend, if you go back to 1980 when rates were around 18%, since then rates have gradually fallen. That's always been a nice tailwind for our industry because people buy their first home at 8% and then 10 years later or 7 years later they buy their next home and rates were usually lower. So people were never running into this lock-in effect like they're running into right now for much of the last 3 or 4 decades. Then I draw a line across here. That's our previous low, just to point to the pandemic period where the Fed did lower rates and the interest rate for mortgages fell below that all-time low. Not only did it fall below it went way below it, and it stayed there for almost 2 years. So from April 2020 to December 2022, we were below the previous all-time low. And as you all know, we were all trapped in our houses at the beginning of the pandemic, and the new hobby among Americans during that time was to browse for homes because they were getting sick of the one they were trapped in. And maybe they needed more office space, or I have 4 children, and I was, the trend has been right to build more homes that consume more land and have smaller yards, right? And as much as the American dream back in the old days might have been to have a big lawn and stuff, I hate yard work. I hate going outside. I'm not really a fan of outside, especially here in Florida where everything's trying to kill you. But I went back to Ohio with my family to visit my parents, and I was like, yes, you can, to my children, you can roll down the hills here in the grass and play in the grass and you'll be just fine because there's no fire ants. And that concept was foreign to them. They're like, really? I could just do that? And then I forgot, they all have bad allergies, and so they still have that up there. So they're having a little, little hives here and there. But no fire ant bites, those are painful. Down here in Florida, we are all buying new homes, and then everyone else from the rest of the country that was still locked down decided they wanted to be here too. So we had a huge surge in housing demand. Home price growth started almost as soon as we could get out the door and start selling homes again, because the buyers were there almost instantly, and the rates were low. Prices were still pretty low at the time too, but you can see the kink in the chart. The green line starts accelerating upward much faster as soon as the rates were down below the old low. If you look from January 2020 to 2020 to 2 years later, we had about a 40% increase in the statewide median price. And if you look at the monthly mortgage payment, up about 31%. So not as much as the prices because we had those low rates keeping the monthly payment down. That's one of the most important statistics for most buyers. Maybe not your high-end luxury buyers who are still financing, but But up in Lee County, if you've got business up there and you're talking about people working class or younger people with families, that's the one that they care about, and that's the one they have to pencil into. Well, they still have to get the down payment, obviously, but it's that monthly payment that's going to determine affordability for most people. And so, great, only up 31%. That's not actually too bad considering the amount of demand we had. Then, of course, rates go up in 2022 from the end of 2021 to the end of 2022. We go from 3.1% to 6.5% after visiting above 7% briefly. And, of course, we get as high as 8% in the following year. So right when that happens, it wasn't immediate. Rates started going up at the beginning of the year, but we had our spring buying season, and that went pretty much as it had been, with prices still going up pretty quick. People were still willing to bid up for higher prices. But by May, June, price growth really stopped rising. Going up to that high of a rate killed demand. And so you compare mid-year 2020 to mid-year 2022, that's a 49% difference. And this is where the rate increases have really affected things. Rates getting up to nearly 6.5%. Even by June of 2022, they were only around 5%, and that was enough to raise your monthly payment by 89% compared to June 2020. So that's what's really slowing down our market. That's still the number one culprit. We have other things going on in Florida that have impacted affordability, but that's still the big one. Since then, only a 2% decline in prices statewide, and only a 16% growth in that monthly payment. But that monthly payment is well above $2,000 for the typical Florida home now, when it used to be closer to $1,000. And so the 5-year change is about 53% growth in the median sale price, and about 120% in terms of the monthly payment. So huge. That's just, we can talk about what rates used to be versus what they are now, but it's the combination of the high prices and the rates that are really giving people trouble. I went too fast. You might say, well, Brad, there has been a lot of inflation. Lawrence showed you the inflation charts. So in terms of inflation, and by the way, wage growth has followed inflation somewhat more recently. So is it really as bad as 120%? Well, let's adjust all the dollar values for inflation on this chart. When you do that, then it's only been a 17% increase in the median sale price over the last 5 years. People forget how long we've been in the doldrums in terms of sale price growth. We had a lot of rapid sale price growth in 2020 and 2021, but it's been pretty flat since then. So really, it's a 5-year growth that's a little over 3% a year, which is kind of typical for Florida. Really, we're kind of back where we were if you account for inflation. But still 75% growth in that monthly payment. So that's what's hurting people. I'll draw a line here across the orange chart, the mortgage rate chart. That's where mortgage rates currently are. You will notice on the left, there was a period of time on my chart where rates were higher than that. And sales were pretty good back then. Not in the very beginning of the 90s, we had a recession, but after that, pretty good. The problem with, you can, depending on your customer and their mentality, maybe they're more willing to consider the idea that they can buy now because rates are similar to what they were in the early 90s. But I would just point out, people aren't stupid. They're trying to pencil in being able to afford something that, if you look at the pink line on the green chart, the current price level is about, even after accounting for inflation, a house costs about twice as much as it did in the 90s. So you're talking about twice the amount of income, of monthly income that people in the 90s had to pay for a house. And then you're talking about a monthly payment that is also roughly twice of what it was in the 90s. Despite the fact that rates were the same now as they were then, affordability is a much more difficult hill to climb. Beyond that, within Florida, we've had to deal with the fastest property rate insurance rate increases, or the highest rate increases over the last 5 years or so, although last year we had some of the lowest property insurance increases, which is positive steps. Some of the legislative actions that have been taken have helped reduce the lawsuit issue in Florida that has brought insurers back in. Hopefully that will mean more competition among rates and keep rates from rising further. So far, it seems to be helping. But, it's like Lawrence mentioned going to the grocery store and getting mad in 2023 when the prices of stuff were going up. I'm still mad when I go to the grocery store. $18 ribeye at Publix per pound, right? So, it was that 2 years ago. I was mad then. I'm still mad about it because I can still remember back in 2020 when it was like 13 or 12. So, our rates are, our insurance rates have gone up quite a bit, and they're not growing much from here, but they're not going back down to where they were either. So that's still an issue. Property taxes, I don't have it on my list here, but that's also something that we need to be mindful of. If you're homesteaded, we have a lot of laws in place in Florida that actually make, property taxes not too much of a problem for you, especially if you bought back in like 2010, 2012. And your assessed cap on your homesteaded property is 3% a year. But if you're moving from out of state or you're a first-time home buyer, you're going to be paying, your just value is going to be your assessed value. You can take off the homestead exemption, but in an $800,000 home market, $50,000 off isn't always that impressive. So different segments of buyers are more affected by the tax situation. I do not have time to get into how we would get rid of property taxes in Florida, even though that's been discussed. There are infinite different ways to approach that would be very difficult. Domestic in-migration has slowed. Here's Lee and Collier County's domestic migration. I'm using last year I showed you this chart. It's out-of-state driver license exchanges. I don't have the Census Bureau has good data for it, migration, but it's usually 2 years old by the time it comes out. So I'm just looking at how many people are moving to Florida and changing in their old state's license for a Florida license. Because I can get that data almost in real time from our state DMV. So looking at that, nice little uptick. I thought that we were gonna completely flatten out or maybe even continue to decline, but Lee County saw a nice little uptick. It is still currently seeing a rate of fewer exchanges than prior to the pandemic, but seems to be trending in the right direction. Collier County is a little more flat and a little bit below where we were in 2019, but what's interesting to me is which states, if we go by which states people are coming from. This is 2019 data for the license exchanges. This shows you for Collier County how many people in 2019, it shows you with 1,075 folks from New York exchanged a New York license for a Florida license here in Collier, and 1,200 folks from Illinois. Normally, when I look at your migration data, it looks a lot like most of the state, but you have an outsized bunch of people from Chicago. So a lot of Chicago folks coming down into your neck of the woods. It's that old, I guess, I-75 brings the Midwesterners down, I-95 brings the New Yorkers down thing. But I want to show you 2022 versus 2019. So this is 2022, the height of the pandemic when people were moving out of the Northeast and pretty much everywhere else into Florida. You had 58% more New Yorkers coming down and exchanging licenses in 2022 than in 2019 in Collier County. But look out west. 113% more Californians, 153% more folks from Washington State. That's a trend I've seen all over Florida as well, where there used to be an invisible Great Wall in the middle of the country, like that. You're not allowed to fly over the Mississippi River and buy a home. Well, now folks are, and I can't guarantee all these people are home buyers, but definitely a lot of folks from out west moving in during the pandemic. But now let's see 2024 versus 2019. And if you do that, doesn't look as fun anymore. There's still more New Yorkers coming in than in 2024 than 2019, but only 8% more, and 3% more folks from Massachusetts. But pretty much everywhere else in the East, you're seeing fewer people than prior to the pandemic. The only reason you're as close to your pre-pandemic numbers as you were, the only reason we're still close to those pre-pandemic levels is because of the folks from West Coast still coming in at greater numbers than they used to. That's how it went. Now, this is all due to affordability. There are still people in New York and Massachusetts who can afford to buy a home in Naples. Not very many people from Cincinnati that can do that. So seeing fewer buyers from the Midwest and the Rust Belt region. Now let's look at Lee County. Similar kind of data in 2019, and in 2022, big explosion of folks from, I don't know what happened, but everyone in Minnesota decided they wanted to move to Fort Myers. Okay. But now you're even seeing fewer New Yorkers coming into Lee County. Some people are like, thank God. So other people are like, no, that's business, and we're not getting it. And then the other half of you are from New York and are mad at me right now. So still more West Coasters coming in, though, but definitely a depletion in the number of folks coming in. Job growth has slowed. Lawrence covered I think that pretty nicely, showed how Florida has seen some of the most growth over the last 5 years in jobs. However, over the last year, we're down to about 1.5% growth. Not only that, but the rest of the U.S. finally did open up during the, maybe a year or two after we did, but now that's keeping more people anchored in their homes up north instead of moving to Florida. But we still have, I think, a lot of potential here because there are still a lot of people who are untethered and can now work remotely who would move down here if the mortgage rate situation wasn't so difficult. I think there's a lot of latent demand that could be unlocked if we get mortgage rates. So we could see a big increase in inflow back into this part of the state. I think overall, the one of the only good things to come out of the pandemic is that people used to threaten to move to Florida. They hated their taxes in their state, and they'd be like, I'm going to move to Florida, and or I don't like the politics in my state. Well, the pandemic, a lot of people, it snapped for them, and they're like, no, I'm actually doing it, and they did it. And now they're calling their friends and saying, hey, I'm so glad I did this. I think there's a lot of latent demand that we could bring down here if the affordability situation improves a little. And of course, we've got the condo issues. Again, I've already talked about that, so I'm not going to belabor it. I've got 3 minutes left. So want to talk about new listings. Inventory, Lawrence showed you inventory charts, which you got to follow those. I just want to say, for a lot of people, when they see an inventory chart and they look and see how high our inventory is in Florida right now, inventory is a little misleading. It makes it look like when you have a lot of inventory, that must mean there's a lot more listings. Well, there's a lot more listings at any given time, but the number of listings we've seen this year statewide for condos is higher than it was, or in 2024, we saw about 172,000 properties get listed, and that was 11%. That should say plus 11% more than in 2023. But it doesn't reflect the huge growth in inventory we've seen over those last 2 years. And actually this year so far, we've seen fewer condos listed than we did last year statewide. And in fact, that was up 4% in the first quarter, but down. The trend has been, as of late, it's really slowed down. So in the second quarter, they were actually down 6% year over year. And so that's probably where we're at now. Looking at your market, very similar, up 8.6% last year. And that's actually within the range of what we saw in 2020 and 2021. So the same number of condos roughly were listed last year here than in 2020 or 2021. And yet in 2021, inventory was like zilch. And right now, inventory is high. Why? Well, inventory goes up when you add more listings, for sure, but it also goes down when you add more sales, or the one that people don't often think about is, in 2021, I list a home in pretty much anywhere in Florida, it's probably off the market within 10 days. It's probably sold within 10 days. So it doesn't get counted in inventory even in the same month that it was listed. And that's what's happening in 2021. All those monthly inventory numbers you see are only including what's currently on the market as of the end of the month. And anything listed in the first half of the month is probably already gone. Now, not only does your inventory include everything listed this month, but probably most of what was listed the previous month and the month before that. So that's why inventory in a lot of ways is rising. So it gives the impression when you look at the inventory chart that we're seeing a lot more listing activity. We're not. When all of you were complaining to me during the pandemic that no one was listing, I was yelling, yes, they are. You're just selling it too fast. But right now, we're seeing a similar number of listings. And they're up 2% so far this year in your area for condos, up 10% in the first quarter, but down 10% in the second quarter. So I think we could actually see that trend continue into the summer and see fewer listings throughout the summer, and we might end up down for the year in terms of condos listed. And here's condos by zip code. You can see where the activity are. You'll be able to download my slides too, so if you want to go back and review these in more depth, because I'm almost out of time here. Single family home new listings statewide up about 10%, pretty similar to 2018 through 2022, and up 4.5% so far this year, but not up nearly as, they were actually down in the second quarter, same as the condo trend. So you can see that it's not all due to our reserve requirements. The single family market is seeing a lot of the same market effects as well. 10% up so far in your market area for single family home new listings last year, and about 7.4% this year. That slowed down too. Lawrence already went through some mortgage slides, so I don't really need to belabor this, but I'm not worried about the distressed market either. We're still seeing most loans coming out as 30-year fixed loans, and it's those adjustable rates that can be really troublesome. Where I do worry is the insurance costs will affect your monthly payment, even if you're in a fixed rate loan situation, and that has driven some additional out-migration from Florida that we have, there are people leaving Florida in greater numbers than usual right now. It's still dwarfed by the number of people who move in, so you don't have to worry about that, but there are people for whom those monthly payments are becoming difficult because of the higher insurance costs and whatnot, so be mindful of that. Same chart Lawrence had, except this is for Florida. There's the delinquent loans in blue, and the orange is foreclosure rate. This is statewide data. We have a couple extra bumps that the national data doesn't have, and also, to be fair, we're Florida, so our foreclosure rate got much higher than the national average. But think about in 2010, 12% of our homes that had mortgages were in foreclosure. That was just for a period of time. It's insane. The banks learned that maybe in a judicial foreclosure state, instead of foreclosing everybody, we should work it out with them or do other things. You see the next shark fin here is Hurricane Irma, which put a lot of people out of work temporarily, messed up a lot of businesses. People had to go delinquent, but you can see the foreclosure rate actually dipped. So the banks worked it out with everyone. Same thing with the pandemic. All these people who couldn't make their payments, or I think this even includes the people who did the forbearance programs. So again, no impact on the orange foreclosure rate line. And then you see two tiny bumps. That's Ian, and that's Milton/Helene, which locally impacted, I think, some people's ability to pay their mortgage. But you can see that's already trending back down. So not worried about a wave of distressed sales. Looking at what I think the biggest factor is where you see differentiation across the state is you see a lot more inventory growth in areas that have built a lot of homes. And that's just because there's more competition for those homes, and builders are able to buy down those rates. They cheat. They cheat. It's not fair to us existing home sellers that the rates can be bought down. So wherever we've seen a lot of building, I've seen a lot of inventory. It correlates very strongly, and that's also where I've seen the largest price declines. This is just a back of the envelope calculation I did. I estimated, okay, what percent of 2020's housing stock in each metro have we permitted or issued building permits for? So for instance, in the US, 6%, if you look at all the permits from 2020 to 2024 for building new homes, that is about 6% of what the housing stock was at the beginning of 2020. So that's the US. For Florida, it's about 11%. So we've roughly expanded our housing stock by 11% if you don't count anything that's bulldozed or torn down. Naples is there at 11%, just a little bit above the Florida average, and then the Lee County, Cape Coral, Fort Myers MSA is 18%. So you're up there in 5th place for the state. Everyone's they're building all this housing for the village people up in Sumter County. So I don't know, they're just permitting like crazy. I can add all the other US metros in here. The orange ones are still Florida. Florida dominates, this is the top 50. Naples is just out of the top 50, but you're 13th place in Lee County in terms of how much your housing stock has expanded. That's gonna drive down prices if you build that much housing in a short period of time. Looking at month supply, your month supply generally for all property types and in both counties is above where it was pre-pandemic, well below where it was during the pandemic. Prices in general for Florida for single-family homes down 2%, and down a little bit more here because you've got more building and more inventory relative to what you usually would have. But you're still way up. Collier County is still, I think, the county that is still the highest above its median price in percentage terms from before the pandemic. Condos and townhouses, very same story. You've got a lot of excess inventory there. You're not alone. Sarasota's doing worse than you are in that regard, and they've got a little bit more of a price decline. Don't tell them I said that. But down 5% statewide, 7% in Collier, but where you've really got a lot of inventory in Lee County, down about 12%. Still way above your 29 level of prices, or 2019 level of prices. Last slides, dollar volumes. The most important statistic I think I create in terms of measuring how our businesses are doing, how much money is flowing through our through our deals. And right now we're about down 4.5% in Collier and Lee County area. Not terrible, right? I mean, considering how bad sales have been, compared to recent years, because the prices are staying, pretty high. You don't have to sell as many houses to have the same amount of dollar volume anymore. So dollar volume only down 4.5% so far this year, and still up 55% compared to 2019. So we're not getting everything we want, but things could be worse. I think, Lawrence has been giving a forecast for years, and he's one of the best forecasters out there. He is consistently more correct on the housing market than most of the other people I look at, Mortgage Bankers Association or National Association of Home Builders. We are happy to have him. The problem is he traps himself into giving you a specific number of what, what are sales going to do, and then people will focus on that number when in fact, as he will tell you, things are very uncertain in the economy right now. We cannot model, for instance, which country is going to get a tariff tomorrow, and if that will, there's no way to actually predict that. So you have to, I think, if you're making planning decisions, look at forecasts, but do not focus on them being the only outcome that's possible. I think right now we could see rates start to fall. Ironically, the BLS numbers that made the president mad, because we revised and said there was actually not very much job growth over the past 2 months, he should have celebrated that, because that means the Fed has more of an excuse to cut rates if the labor market slows down. But now he wants them to, I guess, say that we had a lot more job creation, which would tell the Fed, oh, I guess we better keep rates high. So in any case, what we need to see to have the Fed lower rates is more weakness in the labor market. So in that respect, that number is not that bad if you're looking for mortgage rates to go down. You want to see more weakness in the labor market. It's hard to root against American job creation, I know, right? But I'm not hoping for anyone to lose their job. I'm just hoping for people to slow down in terms of how much they're hiring. So just looking at all that, plan for more of the same. That's one scenario. Rates stay the same. Sales still about where they're at right now. Or the bonus scenario is, if we get rates down, all that latent demand I've been talking about from out of state and in state will be unlocked. Just 1 point off the percentage point down off the mortgage rate is huge, right? So that's going to just unlock so many buyers. So plan for both scenarios. I don't want you to get caught flat-footed and think rates are definitely going to be at 6% at the end of the year when they're not. Possibly. So I don't see any way we get above 7%, so I think that's kind of the limit. Where we're at now, I don't think we get much higher, but there is possibility to unlock a lot of demand if we get it a little lower. So thank you for your time. Sorry I went over. I appreciate it. Always good to be here.